Hello and welcome everyone to the post-show conversation for Finding Your Way. We hope you enjoyed that wonderful presentation of shorts of filmmakers exploring the stories of identity, of culture, and of belonging. My name is Susan Chinson. I'm the festival director for BAAFF, and we are happy to welcome three very special guests with us tonight for this short, around the short and a conversation for But You're Not Black. Here with us today, I'd like to welcome filmmaker Danielle Ayow, who is joining us here today from Canada, as well as one of her interviews from the film, Paula Madison, joining us from Los Angeles, and then also an additional guest making their way to us by our friends at the Roxbury International Film Festival, Rudy Hippolyte. Rudy, welcome. And Rudy is also a filmmaker himself and a Trinidadian born and Boston bred resident of Roxbury. So welcome all three of you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to have all of you here today in the sense, one of the pieces I would like to just share with you to start out is how much our screening committee really loved this film. It was one of the films I think the majority of our screening committee actually felt that the most people needed to see. This was like the one film that people needed to see right now and at this time. And I think a lot of that resonated for me as well. I myself having been, I also identifying with the Chinese diaspora community. I was born in Zimbabwe and came here when I was very young and have resided in Boston ever since. To sort of see this whole conversation, this real journey, Danielle, that you go through in trying to examine how you yourself identify and sort of reconciling what other people are seeing and observing of you. And I'm curious to hear more about, maybe if you would just start off by sharing with us a bit like how long ago this film was made and sort of like where you are kind of in that conversation about your identity and sort of how, that this continues to sit or wrestle, or if you're sort of at peace with, I think for myself, I think it's an ongoing struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll always be a struggle. And I think as, the demographics change around us, as, more globalization happens, I think the conversation is going to continuously change or mutate or evolve. And I'll be asking different questions about my identity in 10 years than I am now. So I would say I am comfortable right now saying I am Chinese, Caribbean, Canadian, but speak to me again in 10 years because I might say something totally different.
Very much, wow. Understandably, so it's definitely a journey that we're all going through. And Paula, some of our viewers joining us today actually may recognize you. You were last with us for Finding Samuel Lowe when we had screened it at the Boston Public Library. Welcome back to Boston. I would very much wish you could be here in person. You were a delight to host. I'm curious to know more about, I feel like you have been such an inspiration and sort of have a very strong guidance, even in the interviews that you did through But You're Not Black. Your perspective of sort of having spoken with Danielle through her journey, but also sort of reflecting on sort of where we are now and why is this conversation still relevant to be having?
Well, sure. I think Danielle alluded to it, that it's an evolution. It's going to continue for quite some time. The fact is that the fastest growing demographic in the United States, for example, is mixed race. The more we have a global perspective, the more we interact with more people who come from other parts of the globe to whatever nation we're in, that will result in, frankly, more relationships, more friendships, and quite possibly more love. So what will happen, I think, is what we've seen for Rudy, for Danielle, for me, for you. It is that our parents came from somewhere and went somewhere. And as we go through our growing up, the question that frequently we will be asked, which sometimes is very distasteful and often intrusive, is, so what are you? What are you? Because you see, the title of this amazing documentary, right, is kind of in response to, so what are you? And then Danielle answers, and it's like, but you're not Black. No, not. But that doesn't negate Caribbean, doesn't negate Chinese, doesn't negate Canadian. So the issue really is that for each of us, as we go into a new place, we have to figure out for ourselves, not what is the answer, but do I choose to answer? Do I choose to answer you asking me, what are you? I watched my mother, who was half Chinese and half African Jamaican, be angered, insulted, and affronted by being asked the question. When she gave her response, I'm Jamaican, then being confronted with, no, 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 no. I mean, but what are you? So my mother would look people directly in the face and call them idiots, right? So I'm so inspired by Danielle's perspective, her documentary, and I, who had the experience of having my film subtitled and shown in China, I think it would be so exciting to have the same thing happen for Danielle, for your documentary, because as China is evolving, China is much more understanding that the Chinese diaspora doesn't always mean just Han Chinese, number one. And two, it doesn't mean that a person of the diaspora who looks like both you, Susan, and both you, Danielle, are necessarily going to be fluent in Mandarin or Cantonese or Hakka, or you name it. It might not happen because maybe that's not actually what one would consider your native tongue.
Oh, true. Danielle, do you, have you shown the film in Asia, China? Sort of how far has this gone out for the diaspora, plans for it?
We had our world premiere in Trinidad in September, at the very beginning of September, and then we have some dates in Toronto. We've shown in LA, so it's primarily been North America. I have yet to go over to Asia. We have yet a festival to accept us in Asia, so hopefully that will change. If any of you festivals in Asia are looking,
I'll try to help you with that.
I would love to show it in Asia, because I'm very curious to see the Chinese diaspora, their interpretation of my film, especially if they don't have a Caribbean background. I'm very curious.
That's great. Yeah, I'd love to see it sort of grow and spread, because I think this is an important conversation that myself, having watched the film, felt like so much of it I could identify with, in that real contemplation of where my family's roots have been, the foods that we eat, how that changes and has evolved and grown, you know, over many generations, and will continue to, you know, continue to expand and morph in many ways and adapt. Rudy, maybe I'd love to, you know, hear a little bit more from you in terms of your perspective, having seen the film, and your perspective, you know, especially here from Boston as a filmmaker, and this idea of like identity and belonging, and you know, that's a lot of work that you've been grappling with as well.
Yeah, I just want to applaud Danielle for her film, which is very personal, but her personal story is very universal. So in looking at the film, I could relate. I think anyone, you know, someone who's biracial can relate in terms of that sense of belonging. Am I white? Am I Black? It goes towards religion. Am I Muslim? Am I Indian? Where you quite don't fit in anywhere because you come from both, you know? So in the same context of, you know, am I Trinidadian? Am I Canadian? Am I Chinese? Again, I grapple with, you know, am I Indian? Am I going to be accepted by the Black community or the white community? because I was exposed to a cosmopolitan family of all, you know, all groups. So I think, you know, Danielle's story, even though you set out, I think in the end of the film, you know, kind of as a spite, you know, and it turned into something that I think resonated with a lot. So as a filmmaker, I think that's beautiful when you're able to tell a story in the way you did, with humor, to educate with some historical context, but very personal. I think that's what filmmaking can do. It can make your story, which you start off with certain ideas, but then it evolves as you start doing it into something else, and you have to be willing to move with that. I think that's what you were able to accomplish.
Thank you. You know what? It's interesting. I didn't expect so many people to relate to it. And then more and more, I kept on hearing more and more stories, and I realized this is way more universal than I thought. It's not just about people who are bicultural. It's not just about people who are biracial, but it's also just about the first generation in North America, because we're removed from our culture. And it's that feeling of, am I enough? Am I still enough to be Chinese? Am I still enough to be Caribbean if I was born here and I went to school here? And it's that feeling that maybe you're diluted and you're just not enough for your culture anymore.
Right, and I think that rings true for anything. It's not just what you're talking about. We all have that imposter syndrome, right? In anything we do. Am I really a filmmaker? Then you do one and you do the next. Okay, yeah, I guess I am. Or in anything that you do, I think, you know, your story, again, speaks to a lot of things that folks can relate to. I think that's what you were able to accomplish.
So are you saying I will feel like a filmmaker after my second film?
Yes. Well, the thing is, you finished your film. I applaud, you know, lots of filmmakers have ideas. You finished it, you learned from it. You did a great job. I wish my first film looked like that. So you have a
So I would like to say that I never heard of the imposter syndrome until a couple of years ago. And I want to be maybe the first person to admit out loud, I've never experienced that. And I will admit that perhaps my parents raised me in such a way that maybe I have such a strong sense of self that I also made just one film, Finding Samuel Lowe. One film in search of my family. And I knew, am I a filmmaker? Yes, I'm a filmmaker. It's not called films maker. One film does a filmmaker make, right? So this business of imposter syndrome, I'm not in any way suggesting that I could say, oh, I'm Oscar material. But what I will say to you is my husband is presently stunned that the one film and the one book that I wrote is now being developed into a television series for China and for the United States. I have two studios who will be co-producing. I'll have a Chinese director. I'll have, quite frankly, probably an African-American director, but it'll be shot in China, Jamaica, and the US. Now, why am I saying this? Because this whole thing of imposter syndrome is among those things that I think adds to making us feel insecure about our standing. Why should I feel insecure? And most importantly, Rudy just said, well, everybody has experienced imposter syndrome. No. And there might be other people who have not experienced it, and there might be people who have experienced it. And I want to say out loud to all of you, you make a film, you're a filmmaker. You learn how to read, you're a reader. You learn how to drive, you're a driver. This is not about competing. And it is merely a matter of being in the company of, being in the category of. So Danielle and Rudy, if you don't already have business cards that say filmmaker, you should have them made.
You know, Paul, I feel like that is actually so much at the theme of, you know, what Danielle's film actually is, this idea of self-determination too, and that it really is within us to determine who we are and not people looking at us to tell us who we are, right? And I think that's sort of, Danielle, that was a big part of, you know, what I took away in watching the film, that it's like, do I consider myself, you know, African? Am I Zimbabwean? You know, and that really is like up to me. Like, I think if you ask my father, who spent most of his life in Rhodesia then at the time, now Zimbabwe, you know, he might still consider himself, oh no, I'm, you know, African. That's his, you know, culturally grew up with. And I now myself, being a part of the Asian American community, especially running this Asian American Film Festival, very much identify as being part of this North American, Asian American diaspora, which is very much a politically constructed. I think that was also another theme that was also brought up in another one of your interviews, Danielle, about this idea that these are just constructions that we have. So I just feel like that seems like a really deep rooted conversation that you have brought to light here. Danielle, I know in sort of speaking with you a little bit earlier, you had mentioned that even in the conversations, even having now done this film, that you still continue to speak to people and they still continue to challenge you in many ways about your self-identification. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about like what that conversation has been like for you, or what that sounds like, and sort of, you know, where is that rubbing?
You know what, it's not, I don't know if it's so much challenging as it is, I don't think they realize that it's still based on a preconceived notion that I get asked a lot. I've actually know in pretty much all the interviews I've done thus far, I've been asked, why is it important for you to identify as Trinidadian? Fine, totally fair question. But I guess the real question in my mind is, well, why does anybody want to identify as anything then? Because I have lots of friends in Canada and, you know, they're first generation Canadian, their parents are from Italy or they're from the UK, they're from Africa. And, you know, they'll say, I'm British Canadian, I'm French Canadian, I'm German Canadian, I'm Italian, because of their parents. So why do all these people have permission to do so, this kind of societal permission to do so, but I don't? And is it just because of my color? And so getting asked that question over and over again, and I kept on kind of repeating the diplomatic answer, which is also the truth. I do it out of a sense of pride, because I know what my grandparents went through. I know what my parents went through. My mother is very strongly Trinidadian. She is very proud of her roots. And she instilled in me this beautiful culture and this way of life. And so that's why I say it. But this notion of like, well, why do you feel like it's important? Well, why do you guys feel like it's important to associate with your cultures then? So yeah, that was a challenge, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. I think I really appreciate the thought process that you have shared with us in that journey of really examining sort of what your thoughts have been, and sort of even just as other people are, you know, projecting onto you. I think it's, for myself, something that is continuing and continues to happen, and we'll explore, especially now I have younger children, and imagining for them, you know, I feel like I have a deep rooted sense of connection to having, you know, been a part of the Chinese diaspora that left southern China, ended up in Africa for probably about, you know, like 6 decades, you know, that my family lived there before we decided to depart for the US. And I feel like that's still a big part of our history. And I want them to also know about that as well. But with them being so American, and sort of this initiative even now as being part of like North America, and especially for those of us in America, you know, trying to balance all of those aspects. I don't think I have an answer yet. And so I feel like knowing that you're still, you know, developing that, and that there's not necessarily an answer now, or that answer that you have now today may change, you know, 10 years from now, definitely for me makes me feel like, no, this is like normal. It definitely makes, yeah.
But Susan, let me ask about the whole notion of people of Asian descent being othered. And I will expand it to the Americas, or maybe I'll just expand it to the Caribbean and North America, right? Even though you are explaining about the distance between, you know, Rhodesia, then Zimbabwe, and here, and that your children are more American than anything, here's what we also know, that the majority of children bullied in public private schools, K through 12 in the United States, are the Asian children, or I should say the Asian American children, right? When Danielle, when you're talking about French or Italian, UK, unless those people are speaking with accents, or unless there is a defining physical characteristic that sets them apart, they're European descent. And the default when speaking about Canadians or speaking about Americans, and I don't call people in this country Americans, I will say citizens or people of the United States, because I'm aware that there are the Americas. So it's very, very, you know, it's very, very kind of self-aggrandizing. It's kind of to say, I am an American. Well, somebody from Venezuela is also an American. So what are we talking about here? But what I'm getting at is the same issue that we are seeing right now, where we're watching this man in the White House in the United States refer to it as the Wuhan virus, only adds to the continued othering of people of the Asian diaspora who did not blend with Europeans or Latinx or African Americans and maintain a more Han physical presentation. So being screamed at, why did you go back where you came from? Where, to Peoria? Where, to Minnesota? To Staten Island? That's where I came. I mean, what's the answer to that? So I would say that in spite of the migration and the embedding themselves into particular communities, I'll limit it to people of the Chinese diaspora. In most instances, wherever they have gone, they're not really accepted. I could say something similar about any other racial group of people for whom their physical appearance is non-European. You know, when you think about Alexander VI in the 1400s, the Pope dividing the world and saying to the Portuguese and to the Spanish, everyone who's not a Christian, every non-Christian land you can claim in the name of the Pope, in the name of the church. That's why we find ourselves, but I'm not Black, right? I'm part Chinese. Why do I have to tell you that? And who is it who's asking me that in the first place? You know, what I'm throwing out here is I don't want us to lose sight of the issue of being othered, which results in never really being accepted. I tend to go off on these things, sorry.
No, it's, you know what though, one of the things that I hope that people derive from my movie is that we're not that other. The whole point is that we're not that other, because again, I had Caribbean friends who were Black, who were brown, and for all intents and purposes, We grew up together. We went to the same schools. We ate the same things. We grew up in the exact same households. Our parents disciplined us the exact same way. But because of the color of their skin, they're treated differently. Because of the color of my skin, I've enjoyed privileges that aren't available to them. And so I was just hoping that people looked at the film and said, oh, okay, hold on. I'm looking at Paula, I'm looking at Danielle, I'm looking at Dr. Camille and all of Danielle's friends, and they are all different shades, but they all kind of have the same background and they all have the same past. So then why am I treating Paula differently? So I was hoping that people saw that and said, okay, I get it. We're actually a lot more similar underneath than we like to recognize. But yes, I do see what's happening in the States, and that's a whole nother conversation of profanities that I'll do. So.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think, I mean, if you're growing up in Trinidad, I think we're all Trinidadian. So if you're there, if you're living there, there isn't that sense of other, right? For the Chinese community or the Lebanese community, everybody, what they do have is there's a class, schism, right? So we always find a way, whether it's religion or what have you, find a way, whether it's the power dynamics for whatever reason. But as Danielle states, when you boil down to it, and that's why it's relatable, we all are the same. We all have the same aspirations. We're all human beings. We're all at that level, right? So I think that's what ultimately, when I do my films, I'm trying to have others get a sense of, the life of somebody else who they may not think is similar. And coming out of it, there's that empathy. Wow, I didn't know that. I think that's what you tried to do, and you did accomplish in your film, in that, and by interviewing different generations, right, that was feeling the same way that they were othered. I think in coming out of looking at your film, we see, wow, Danielle, she's the same as I am, or her friends are, or her mom is, and I think that's what we come out of it with, not thinking othered. But in every society, we always find a reason and find something, whether it's class, religion, whatever, to separate ourselves. But if we boil it down to we're human beings, then we can all relate and live, well together. So.
Oh, I love that, Rudy. I feel like in many ways too, with this presentation of the block of shorts, Finding Your Way here, that's very much what I feel like each of these filmmakers are saying, that this is definitely an exploration of diving in deeper into our humanity and having more empathy for one another, and trying to understand that this is a human experience that we are all living through and with, as we try to understand and discover ourselves and one another. And so I really feel that, through But You're Not Black, Danielle, and the story that you have shared with us in your journey, really has exemplified a lot of those wishes that I feel like film, and as filmmakers, people are trying to explore and highlight, at least from the film festival standpoint, that we are trying to create the spaces for more people to have and to gather and to connect with. So with that, I would just say thank you so much for sharing yourself and your work and your storytelling. And Paula, thank you so much for, I feel like, just all of your words of wisdom every time, I feel like I have an opportunity to hear you speak. I always am inspired by your work. And Rudy, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and sort of being also a connection here in Boston, and sharing reflections. I imagine that they actually reflect a lot of what many audience members who are watching this now feel as well. And we wish you, Danielle, so much more as your film continues to go on, and hope to see you back again for another film festival, and Paul and Rudy too, as filmmakers all. This esteemed panel is we're so excited to be hosting you for this. Thank you.
No, thank you for having my film. Thank you for having me. And don't worry, Paula, Rudy, and myself, our film is coming out next year and we'll be in the festival next year. So
Great.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
All right, have a wonderful day. Take care.
too.
Thank you.